Hey everybody, Pastor Randy here. Welcome to Making It Simple. It's a beautiful Monday. Glad to be back with you. Hope you had a great weekend. Looking forward to jumping back into our lesson, The Blindness of Doubt. We've been looking at this through the story of Thomas. Yes, that Thomas, doubting Thomas. We talked about at the end of our lesson last week about the importance of the relationship with Christ and how that guides us through this whole thing that we call faith. You see, today, so many words now have such a broad spectrum meaning. Faith is attributed to pretty much anything. It really is. But when we define the word, and I think what we learn through definitions is not only the proper application of a word, but really the depth of the word. And it's not near as broad as how we relate them. While today faith can be attributed to pretty much anything, from worshiping trees to cows, or I don't know. I mean, it's everything because we attribute that word to a religious system. However, that falls short when we actually learn the meaning of the word. The word itself means unflagging trust. That means I have zero doubt. What can you say in your life that you have zero doubt about? Zero. I don't know that any of us could fall into that category, okay? And as it pertains to relationship, especially in the manner of a spiritual level, that takes an undetermined amount of time to figure that out. That is why it has to be based on a relationship and not a religious system. Because those will fail you. Bottom line. We're not comparing apples and oranges, and we're not comparing Buddhist and Baptist. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the reflection of the heart. What is really there? And as we ended off last week, we talked about the importance of the relationship, and you don't trust who you don't know. And I've even taken that further in other lessons. You don't trust who you don't know, and you don't follow who you don't know, and you don't follow who you don't trust. So where does that all go back to? That is an intentional method for me as an individual, and you as an individual, that if I'm going to follow Jesus, I got to know who he is. And the only way that I'm going to do that is not by what everybody else tells me, but by what I learn the more that I look. What I learn by the more that I watch. What I learn by the more that I hear. How do we hear him? Just like you hear me. Listen, it's everywhere. We just had a little program at our church for a couple of days, with a bunch of kids from the community. It was called Magnified. And the concept of that was listening for God in everything. See, oftentimes we've compartmentalized God and placed him in the breaking cage of emergency glass or under the religion banner and all these other things. And friends, God can't be limited. And just as we saw, they're in the room, the door is locked, and Jesus shows up. They didn't invite him, and they didn't open the door for him. He just came in. Was that rude or obnoxious? No. It was what they needed at that moment. See, friends, he shows up in our life when we need him, most especially when we need him. Now, some may argue, well, I'm needing this and needing that. But we don't always see the answers. See, Thomas was saying, unless I see, unless I touch, I will never believe. We don't always see the answers, but it's not because they're not visible. It's not because they don't exist. It's because we're not looking in the right place. Oftentimes in this life, we get conditioned to believe that the answer that we're searching can only be in one place. That's most especially true like in doctor stuff. Well, it can only be over at, good old Doc Hobbs, or it can only be at CVS, or we don't consider the fact that God may have the answer right in front of you in something else, in somewhere else, in someone else. What we find in this story is Jesus is pointing out to Thomas. All right, so he's saying, if I don't put my finger in the hand, if I don't put my finger in the side, if I don't see it for myself, if I don't touch it, feel it, all the deal, I'll never believe it. What he's telling him as Jesus has entered the room, and he said, Thomas, come here. Put your finger right here. Put your finger right here. What he's telling him is he's answering where he's at. He's meeting him in that need. But he's also telling him, don't be a non-believer. Don't be one without hope. Don't be like that. Don't be faithless, but believe. What he's telling him is, rather than demanding proof or needing proof, believe. What does that say? What does that mean? What he's saying is, if we continually do that, if we continue to say, I got to see it to believe it, I'm demanding proof, I have to have proof, that will hinder your faith. In other words, it can't grow. Because if we base everything that we do on the necessity to have it proven, then why do we need to have faith? Because faith is unflagging trust. Well, I don't need to build trust if I can see it. That makes sense? A lot of times we struggle with that today. We do. All of us, we struggle with that today because somebody inevitably says, and maybe all of us have at some point in time, but how can I believe in something that I can't see? We're not talking about myths and legends. Okay, again, we talked about that in a former lesson, and again, I side on both sides of that. Are some things a little bit hard to believe? Sure they are. But for the person who says that they saw whatever it is that they saw, it's very real to them. Okay? We can get into the arguments of reality and made up all day long. But the bottom line is, if we look back through the eyes of Thomas and how Jesus met that, but I love what he's saying here. He's saying you can continue to demand proof. You may need proof. However, in doing so, you're not growing in your faith. And as it pertains to our walk with Christ, this is of the utmost importance. But how many people say, well, how can I believe in what I can't see? How could God exist? I can't see it. But if we point out something like a simple illustration like air, okay, someone will, without a doubt, will say, well, that is not the same thing. That's science. But it's exactly the same thing. You can't see it. You can't. And honestly, there's no proof that it's there. But yet, it is. Because if it weren't, you wouldn't be. It's in this room, but I can't show it to you. It's in your room. You can't show it to me. We can't capture it in a jar. We can't put it in a bag. But it's there. Or we wouldn't be. Trusting in the presence and power of God is a step of faith all by itself, because it requires a pursuit of understanding what that really means in order for it to make any difference in our life. And that is why the demand of proof is not growing us in our faith. Rather than, Jesus said, for those who believe, anything is possible. Now, I get the gimmick guys on TV, they use that in a very, very wrong way to try to get people, well, if you just believe this morning that $1 million check is going to show up in your mailbox, God's going to... That's an entirely different video. And it's become nauseating to me for people to have used God in such a horrifying fashion. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about you. Is it possible that you can come to a better place in your life and in a pursuance of your faith and in your relationship with Christ and come to peace with that, regardless of what's going on around you in the world? Absolutely. It is absolutely possible. And we find that in this story. And so this is our lesson for the day. Be mindful of the demand for proof, because it very well may be hindering your growth in your faith. We'll come back tomorrow for some more Thomas, some more doubt, and some more blindness. God bless you. Hope you have a great day.